that he is successful in Ukraine. He has been
driving.
using in Ukraine
Salome.
all his first ambitions, strategic
Good job,
ambitions,
Salome,
taking
good.
Kiev, dividing the government and the population, dividing Ukraine from Europe, dividing European between themselves, European with their populations. All of these big ambitions have not materialized. So yes, he is not yet defeated strategically, militarily, but he is not victorious.
But he is
so I
at
think
the
that
moment.
it's a time to gather efforts.
But he is at the moment taking land. And I wonder if there's a situation, and Georgia knows this full well because Russian troops invaded in 2008, if he retains control of part of Ukraine, do you fear what that means for Georgia?
We all have to fear what it means if Russia retains land and does not have to retreat in its own internationally recognized borders. But at the same time, Georgia has not been invaded once. Georgia has been invaded 3 times at least, and we can count more. So there is nothing much more that Russia has to do. Russia is occupying our territories. It's not a question of separatism, it's a question of directly occupying. Russia has military bases on our territory. So what Russia is now trying to do, and will continue as it does with other countries in Europe and elsewhere, it's a hybrid war, which is already started. It's trying to win through propaganda, it's trying to destabilize. Today, we had another person that has been hijacked in the occupied territories. It's all the time on this non-existing border that they're taking hostages. So the constant attempts to destabilize Georgia is something that we know very well.
Okay.
One thing that we can say is that probably we are a bit more resilient than other countries would be in that situation because of the experience, because the Georgian population knows quite well.
Well, I want to come on, we'll talk about the breakaway regions in a moment, but just in terms of the war in Ukraine, Russia is building a deep sea port in Abkhazia, one of these breakaway parts of Georgia. President Zelensky said Russia announced the creation of a new base, but we will reach them everywhere. That port, could that see Georgia being dragged into the war?
It could. It's a project. It's again part of the Russian propaganda for the time being. The way Mr. Putin, as an old KGB agent, he's in fact waging a psychological war more than a military war. And it has been true with Ukraine, it's true with the rest. It's very important what's happening with this port, and I think that it's something that the Europeans should realize, because it's the Black Sea that is at stake. Nobody can afford to see Russia taking control of this part of the Black Sea, which is our coast on the Black Sea, because that means that all the projects for the future that the European Union has with connectivity, strategic transport over the Black Sea and connection with the rest of over the Caucasus to the Central Asian countries, that is something that we all need very much, is at stake there. So we need...
But you talk about it being a psychological game. There's been dredging there. Do you not think that that seaport will be built?
I don't know. It's not for the time being. It's something that is a project that is announced with very loud voices. But what I'm saying is that we should react to that already now. We shouldn't wait for the port to be coming into function, which will take probably 1 or 2 years if they decide to go ahead. That's now that we need to have the Europeans consider that in the Black Sea they cannot be evicted by Russia. They have to
what can they do about it? Sorry, what are you calling on the EU to do?
They have to restart what was happening before, which is the port calls in the Black Sea, in Georgia, especially in the port of Batumi, Poti. They have to support the creation of Anaklia port, where we should see active investment of the European Union and of the Americans. It shouldn't be words that we need to have.
That's not going to stop Russia building that port, though.
Excuse me?
That's not going to stop Russia building that port.
No, but we should be ahead.
What, so that literally they can face off against each other?
Well, they are facing off one way or the other, but I think that the determination should be there and seen that European Union considers what it is now, that the Black Sea is de facto a European sea where Europe has a right to be present, where Europe cannot be excluded, and that's something that can be discussed together with Turkey, which is a very important partner in the Black Sea, something that should interest UK.
Russia being cut off from the West has led to increased trade with Georgia. There's been a huge jump in imports in the first year of the war. Georgia's also the land from Turkey to Russia. Is that bringing the two countries together because Georgia's even more dependent on Russia?
We're a bit more dependent towards Russia. We are less dependent than many countries have been on energy matters because we have a close neighbor that is Azerbaijan, and that has helped us to avoid this dependency. We're dependent in export and imports of products, mainly agricultural products and some cars shipments. But it has brought Georgia a bit closer to Russia. But that doesn't mean that Georgia is closer to Russia. That will never happen because we have our history. We know how much closer we can get, which was not the case for some of the European countries that let themselves to be overwhelmed by the energy dependency towards Russia.
Okay, so do you think, to hear you, one would think Georgia needs to choose between joining NATO and the EU on the one hand and Russia on the other?
Georgia has chosen constantly since 30 years. The Georgian population, when asked, or when it has to march on the street, it marches. Constantly, 80% of the population, and that's a very high percentage, says that it wants Europe, it wants NATO, and it doesn't want anything else. There is no other perspective for Georgia.
Okay, but there's a difficulty, which you will be fully aware of, which is that the politicians, despite what the polls say, appear to play both sides. And we have the then Prime Minister of the governing party, Georgian Green, now its chair, Salome Zurabishvili, said last June, one of the reasons Russia invaded Ukraine was Ukraine's will and determination to become a member of NATO. Therefore, we see the consequences. And yet, you're making it clear, the government has said that it wants to join NATO. So what would that mean?
Governments come and go. The Georgian population's will has been unchanged over 30 years of independence. It has been unchanged before that, because one of the countries that was the most reticent to the Soviet rule was Georgia. But if we leave with the recent period, Georgian population is very determined. And I think that what is important to see is that since the decision of the European Union in December to grant the candidate status, the government has changed its rhetoric. The government has changed, the prime minister is gone and there is a new prime minister who is now with a completely new rhetoric, very pro-European, has been to Brussels as a first trip.
They've just swapped places.
They have swapped places, but they have swapped
the prime
rhetoric
minister
too.
and the chair.
And that's very important. If that forces a consensus, that's fine, and I can only hail that. If not, whichever government will not be definitely on the European side will not win the next elections.
But we're in a situation where we have who's now chairman of the party, saying the European Parliament's been trying to drag Georgia into the war against Russia. Are you saying that's...
No, I'm saying that he has said that. He's president of the party. That party is going into elections in October, and the Georgian population's will is unaltered by these declarations.
Let's talk about the strange situation because the truth is that Georgia can't join NATO for a start because of the breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and that's not going to change, is it?
Why is it not going to change?
For 30 years, Abkhazia and South Ossetia have been separate.
Have been occupied. And I can see, I know some examples. Germany was one. So I'm never going to say that there is no hope for reuniting not only territories but populations. And the very big hope the very clear path towards one form of reunion of these occupied territories is what? It's a European path. It's European integration.
But just wait
Because
one second. We
these-
should make clear to people what you're talking about. Because the Georgians and we're talking about a fifth of what was Georgia.
20% of our territory.
Indeed. There were Georgians who were displaced, and now those two territories, South Ossetia particularly, extremely dependent on Russia. There's no will to be reunited with Georgia in those territories.
South Ossetia, there is no will. South Ossetia is a large military base with people that are living there that are basically the people working for the military base. So there, I agree, you cannot talk about political will. The case in Abkhazia is very different. Abkhazia has been discovering that what Russia had promised.
Hi. Hi. Just a second. Go for it. Yes. When we are waiting, one car.